Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Mino, and I'm presenting on Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day was a thinker, writer, journalist, advocate, activist, nurse, and leader of the Catholic worker movement. She was a friend to the masses. She identified very strongly with the masses, and that idea of identifying with the masses was a consistent theme across her personal thought, her theological thought, and her economic and political philosophy. There's a lot about her that needs to get covered, so let's get going. She was born November 8th, 1897, to a pre-World War I middle-class family. She moved frequently between major U.S. cities. She witnessed the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, but most importantly, she witnessed the relief efforts provided by her mom and some of her neighbors to those who had lost their homes during that earthquake. Her parents also encouraged literacy and learning. She read just all the time and was exposed to a number of different authors, Upton Sinclair, Charles Dickens, Dostoevsky, and these authors and her experiences in witnessing the disaster relief in San Francisco really shaped her thought towards social justice and gave her a consciousness of it from a very early age. She credits Dostoevsky in helping her maintain her faith at a time where she wanted to have faith in God, but had rejected organized religion. And it's going to be a very consistent theme that her life experiences will inform her theology and inform her thinking, and will be difficult to separate from just what she is doing as a theologian and as a worker. So we'll want to pay attention to that. She did not attend church regularly until about age of 10. She was catechized, baptized, and confirmed in the Episcopal Church at age 13, and by age 16 had earned a scholarship to the University of Illinois and began attending school there, but she then began having to support herself, and she lived in poverty. She had to work odd jobs as a live-in nanny and as a journalist just to stay afloat. During that time at the University of Illinois, she also joined the Socialist Party, where, while keeping faith in God, she had rejected organized religion. She was really frustrated by what she saw as a failure of the church to do much of anything at all to prevent the injustices that were happening. And so she was just very frustrated that the church, for all its goodness, was not helping people more. Then she moved to New York and began working for a socialist newspaper called the New York Call. A lot of her co-workers were socialist, communists, labor organizers, anarchists, and a number of other people who just were not happy with the present society and economic system. She often covered labor meetings and protests, and when she was given options on what she would write about, she would often choose to write about the social ills of society at the time. And from her autobiography, there's a quote on the right here that just really reflects her relationship with the church at the time. That just why the church was so inactive in not just doing works of mercy, but preventing the injustices that necessitated the mercy in the first place. Then when she went to cover a suffragist protest in Washington, D.C., and then to participate herself, she was jailed. It became a definitive experience in her life. She went on a hunger strike. She deeply despaired of the state of humanity and society, but then further identified with the masses and the struggle to be seen as valuable. And so this further motivated her to continue acting out, to continue to protesting, and to really just continue to advocate for change. Following this, she began to wander. She spent time working as a nurse. She chose to do this because a friend of hers had recently committed suicide, and then at the time there was the Spanish flu pandemic. And after that time, she continued working as a writer and as a journalist. However, she also entered a period of personal chaos where she went through several relationships, got pregnant and had an abortion, and really just put her off center, and she felt very spiritually adrift, according to her autobiography. She very infrequently attended church, but when she did, it was almost always a Catholic church. Again, she would witness how in almost every major city she went to, a lot of the common working masses would identify as being Catholic and felt like the Catholic Church was the church of the masses. During this time of chaos, she began using the Catholic Church as a place of rest. She began practicing some spiritual disciplines and really began to seek out the Catholic Church and see the Catholic Church as a church of the masses, and that she herself should be a Catholic because of their solidarity with the masses. Then she moved to Staten Island in 1925. It was a very happy period in her life. She was married to someone with political views very similar to her own. But also at that time, she began to feel like her happiness was very hollow. She wasn't content with it. And this drove her to continue to practice spiritual disciplines, to seek out spiritual counsel from a local nun, began singing some of the songs that she learned as a teenager in church. And her growing attraction to religion began causing issues in her marriage. And then when she became pregnant, it really put her in a time of crisis, but also joy, because she considered this something of a personal miracle. She had believed her abortion had made her sterile and she wouldn't be able to have children anymore. But she wanted something better for her daughter than she had had growing up, and so she wanted to have her daughter baptized, and she wanted to be confirmed as a Catholic. But she knew if she did this, it would cause her husband to leave her. And she agonized over it for a long time, and ultimately it made her sick. But then she did choose to become confirmed as a Catholic, choose to have her child baptized, and chose to end her marriage because she believed it was necessary both for her and for her child to grow and to have a sense of peace and love and solidarity with the masses. She continued working as a journalist, and in 1932, a Catholic organization commissioned her to cover a hunger march led by the communists that was happening in Washington, D.C. She was simultaneously overjoyed and frustrated while observing this march because she felt great solidarity with the communists and their ideals, but was also really frustrated because the church was not participating in this march. There weren't church leaders. The church was not doing the things the communists were doing to help the common people. Again, a quote from her autobiography gives just a sense of what was going through her mind when she was seeing these things. And she was so frustrated that she went to a Catholic shrine in Washington, D.C., and prayed what she called a special prayer, asking God to use her and the talent she had to help the poor. And it was upon returning to New York that she met Peter Maurin and was able to found the Catholic Worker Movement. She credits Maurin with completing her education, teaching her about the biblical ideals of justice and the philosophy of personalism. And it was together that they were able to found the movement. Maurin was the idealist and Day was the pragmatist. And together they were able to get some donations. Day was writing a newspaper called The Catholic Worker. And that was how they funded the Catholic Worker Movement. This movement gave voice to Catholic social teachings, opened up hospitality houses and farms in both rural and urban areas within the U.S. And within the first several years, they had a lot of success, a lot of support. A lot of people were very happy to see them and hear from them. Before, a lot of people had felt like only the communists cared about the masses, but didn't really like the necessary atheism that seemed to come along with communism. And so giving them a more moderate option allowed them a lot of support. However, because of their pacifism, they wound up losing a lot of support during the Spanish Civil War and then World War II. Day was one of the few people who really strongly stuck to pacifism even during World War II. And that lack of support and the loss of a lot of their farms and locations and volunteers had led to a number of people saying that the movement was dead and that it was just a relic of the Great Depression. But Day said, no, there's more for this movement to do. There's more that we need to do. And as Peter Maurin's health was failing, she took over and became the sole leader of the movement and led its development organizationally and spiritually for the next several decades. In the following decades during the Cold War, she was regularly accused of being a communist. She opposed war. She would help people who opposed the draft during Vietnam. She advocated for racial equality. But she identified as a Christian personalist, and in her writings and in her actions, it was very clear that she rejected both communism and capitalism. She created and continued to advocate for a middle way. During a number of these protests that she and other members of the Catholic worker movement would participate in, she would be arrested. And the last time she was jailed was at the ripe old age of 76. She was helping participate in a strike with Cesar Chavez and a number of Hispanic farm workers in California. And she was jailed for a period of about 10 days during that time. One of the big impacts she had on the Catholic worker movement was following World War II. She strongly advocated for a continuance of not just practical help for the worker, but also spiritual disciplines. And she helped convert some of the farms that the Catholic worker movement owned into spiritual retreat centers. She also continued working as a speaker, a writer, a journalist, and even worked to influence some of the decisions that were happening in Vatican II to make sure that Catholics had the option to be conscientious objectors and to oppose war and to advocate for better social and economic practices. Her health began to fail in 1970, and she died November 29, 1980. She gave us a model of Christian social practice that did not sacrifice personal spiritual development. We often create a dichotomy between personal spiritual development and social justice, saying that we can prioritize one or the other. However, Day actively pursued both and made sure that her movement could do the same. Her work also created a foundation and popular support for the preferential option for the poor and social activism as Christians. We now had an option for action defined on Christian terms rather than by communism or capitalism. Day and the Catholic Church advocated for a system called distributism that brought their voice out of the dichotomy between the competing empires of capitalism and communism. She also did not work her ideas into a strictly theological framework, and she didn't treat theology in isolation. A lot of her ideas in her writings engage political and economic philosophy and incorporate those into her theology. You'll notice she often writes about and uses terms such as the means of production, which is typically found in Marxist writings. Day also did not limit her action and expectation of justice to just the church. While she did call on the church to act and to seek justice, she also called on the church to pressure the government to act and seek justice. She believed the government had a particular role in ensuring justice and equity. The two foundational philosophies that informed many of her ideas, though they do not originate with her, are personalism and distributism. Unfortunately, I do not have time to go into much detail on them other than what I have placed on these slides. Dorothy Day gave us many practical models for meeting the needs of the poor and for acting as the church. We still have a problem with urban and rural poverty today, and hospitality houses and farms could go a long way towards helping that, especially as food and water scarcity increase. She also has provided a model for media use and activism as a means of generating support and inciting change, and ensuring that there is a Christian voice amid the cacophony of other voices. She did her best to thread the needle between the discourses of socialism, communism, and capitalism. She wanted to find a different way, and through Marin and her development as a Catholic, she found that different way through distributism. She did not remain locked within her American identity, but instead chose to visit the USSR, oppose the dominant economic system of the day, and regularly violated the norms established for a good American through protest and activism. Day chose Christ over acting as an antithesis of communism, or as an antithesis of capitalism, and her work and example continues to inspire and inform us today. Thank you for watching. I'm going to close with this picture of Dorothy Day and a homeless Jesus. That's what the painting is titled. I look forward to seeing you in the forums.